Okay, so it's March. It's the start of spring and the bass are starting to become active. Today, I'm gonna show you what I carry in my lure bag on every session and why you should too. I'm gonna go through why I carry them, what conditions I use them in, what different ones there are, what they're for, how they work, and hopefully, dude, this year, man, this is your year. Let's start with the soft plastic side. In the early season, mid-season, late season, I like to opt for a, about a 10 centimeter shad. These lures are perfect. They're a perfect size. The 10 centimeter it's the size of a bait fish. So, I mean, bait fish, mullet, most of the time, if bass are going for bait fish, it is little mullet fry or little fry. They're not much bigger than this, okay? 10 centimeter is ample. I like to, a lot of the time, opt for a shad lure with a smaller paddle tail as opposed to a bigger paddle tail. There's a reason for a small paddle and there's a reason for a big paddle. If the water is calm and it's a little bit shallow, let's say it's right before low tide, then I will opt for a smaller paddle tail, because a smaller paddle tail gives a lot of vibration, so it's more of a vibrating movement rather than a rocking movement with a bigger paddle tail. Small paddle, big paddle. Active fish, we want to get them active. Active, we want to get them active. Does that make sense? If you find that fish aren't in the water column where you want them, try different parts of the water column. If I'm throwing out a smaller shad lure and it's not hitting in that part of the water column, I will opt for a jig-headed lure, which falls quicker to the bottom and it searches the bottom. When am I going to use this? I'm going to use it when it's a little bit windy, when the sea is a little bit choppy, if you're out on the open coast, or if you are in a harbor. If it's choppy, put yourself a weight forward jig head on there, and then it'll kind of dig in the water. So yeah, that's when I like to use those. A weedless jig head I like to use all year round. Now, they call it a weedless jig head, but I don't think it's a weedless jig head. I think it's more snagless, because any type of lure is going to pick up weed. So if you start picking up weed, don't say, oh, my weedless hooks don't work, because they do work, because you just didn't get snagged in all that weed. So they're snagless, not really weedless, but you know. I could go on for days and days and days on soft plastics, but we're not going to. We're going to move on now, and we're going to move on to metals. Got to have a metal in your box. This is the metal that I like to use. That is a Slingshot surface iron. If it's windy, if it's choppy, if I'm just getting to a mark, I'll usually just throw a metal out. It goes really, really far, and you can pinpoint and you can find fish that way most of the time. There's a lot of metals out there. I like the surface irons. I mean, you've got Savage Gear Seekers, there are Weston Salties, there are ones, there's loads of metals all over the place. Always have a metal in your box. When you get down to a mark, especially if it's a mark that you haven't fished before, chuck a metal on and go and find the fish. Simple. I mean, you can use a metal in any condition. Windy, calm, flow. I forgot to tell you about flow and soft plastics. Soft plastics and the flow are awesome. Okay, no more soft plastics. Pretty basically for metals, man, that is all you need to know about metals. Just stick one on, find the fish, any condition, there you go. For me, a silver lure, a silver metal replicates a bait fish in the water. If you've ever been on a boat and you've seen a whole bunch of bait fish, you can see all the little tiny flashes. And I think with a silver metal, that is what it's replicating, pretty basically. So stick metal in your box, chuck it out, find some fish and catch them. Seeing a fish, take your lure, is absolutely amazing. And that is why we're going on this side of the lure box. Surface lures, baby. I love a surface lure, man. First, before we get to the surface lures, what I want to do, let's talk about shallow diving lures. I know you've heard about shallow diving lures, the ones with the lip. Lures don't need to be really big. It's not, big lures don't always catch big fish. Think to yourself, or even look when you get to your mark, look and see what size the bait fish are. I can almost guarantee you that they are about that size. This is an IMA Suzuki 95. Again, Fish's shallow runner, they're about the same size. And that, I mean, seriously, that's the size of a bait fish. That's all you need. They dive between 1/2 meter to 1 meter, some of them 2 meters. When I use these is if I've got a surface lure on and the surface lure is just not doing it, but a metal or a lure that's on the bottom isn't doing it either, I will search the middle of the column, middle of the water column, with a shallow diver. The wobble from a shallow diver, it is absolutely, it's just amazing. So if you're fishing a water column, nothing's taking the top, nothing's taking the bottom, search the middle with a shallow diver. Search all sections of your water column. So those are shallow divers. Now we're going to get to surface lures. There are 3 types of surface lures that I like to use. One of them is my absolute favorite, and I mean, and it has been for a really long time, and it is the Fish's S Petite. The S Petite is a surface lure that you can use when there's no motion on the water, when there's a little ripple on the water. If it gets a little bit rough, the S Petite, it'll work, but there are different options. There's better options for when the sea is rough. I like to use an S Petite when there's not much motion or no motion on the water surface. If there are a little bit of ripples on the water surface, then I'll use it. Also use an S Petite if the water is really shallow. Because these lures sit horizontal like that on the water surface, you can fish them really shallow. I fish them in like 6 inches or less of water sometimes. You can fish them deep, but I would rather have an S Petite when it's really shallow. If you've got some bladderwrack or some weed on the side of the bank, then you can cast along it. It'll take the fish right out of their hiding, dude. So that's when I like to use an S Petite. When the water is got a little bit of movement, if it's still, if I'm casting with the bank, then I'll use an S Petite. My other absolute favorite lure is the IMA Chappie 80. And if you notice, that Chappie 80 is the same size as a bait fish. A bait fish is usually that size. When I like to use an IMA Chappie is when there's wind and the surface of the sea is a little bit more choppy. This will grip into the water, and it is absolutely outstanding when you've got some chop on the water. So when am I going to use this? If I'm casting out far into, like not along the bank, but out into the water, if it's choppy, and if I want to search out for some fish. Chappie will cast a mile. It makes a hell of a lot of noise. It makes a hell of a lot of motion on the surface of the water, and it's perfect in windy conditions and when the sea is a little bit rougher. That's when I would use it. Another type of surface lure is a silent surface lure, like the Pugachev Cobra. I like to use a silent lure maybe first thing in the morning. There's just a little bit of light. And I'll use a silent surface lure later in the season when they don't want commotion. Sometimes, have you ever got home from work and the kids are yelling and all that stuff and you're just like, stop, I don't want to. Silent lure later in the season, or when it's not light, it's not dark, and you just need something to skip across silently trying to get away, and they'll come out and they'll get it usually, dude. So we've got silent for stealth movement. We've got things like the Chappie 80 for searching and a little bit louder when there's more movement on the surface. And then when there's not a lot of movement on the surface, or when it's really, really still, or when it's really, really shallow, something like this guy right here. Absolute favorite lure, man. And those are the lures that I carry with me all the time. I carry far too much, and I shouldn't, but I do. Really soft plastic, belly weighted soft plastic, jig headed soft plastic, forward weighted jig headed soft plastic, metal, shallow divers, and some surface lures. That's what I carry with me all the time. I really do hope, I know I rambled on, but I hope that I explained some of these lures and you know when to use them now, dude. If you have any questions, put it down in the comments. If you're just starting out lure fishing and you want to know what to get and you don't want to spend a fortune, check out this video right here and it'll tell you exactly what you need.